Your manipulation bought you a ring, Alara, but never my heart. Caleb Thorne's voice, a blade of ice in the opulent silence of Lakeview Estate, always cut deep. He watched her, a living reminder of how she'd blackmailed him into this loveless marriage, using his ailing sister Serena's life as a cruel, unforgivable pawn. Despite the venom in his gaze, a clause in their contract compelled his presence, and as her hand trembled towards him, he lowered himself to the bed, a predator accepting its due with cold indifference. The chilling indifference was a physical weight, pressing down on Alara as Caleb Thorne moved with a detached efficiency that mocked the intimacy of the act. His touch was devoid of warmth, his gaze distant, seeing not her, but the phantom of a past he believed she had stolen. Every calculated thrust was a reminder of her transgression, a silent declaration of contempt etched into the very fabric of their forced union. "Do you truly feel nothing?" Her whisper was barely audible, a fragile plea swallowed by the vast, sterile silence of their opulent bedroom at Lakeview Estate. The question hung in the air, audacious and desperate, a last flicker of hope against the overwhelming darkness. Caleb paused, his body a rigid sculpture of disdain above her. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, finally met hers, but there was no recognition, only a searing contempt that made her flinch. "Nothing but disgust," he bit out, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Every touch is a reminder of the bargain you struck. Serena's life for my name. A price too steep, a soul too cheap." He pulled back, the physical barrier between them instantly replaced by an unbridgeable emotional chasm. He didn't even bother to hide his revulsion as he moved to the edge of the bed, his back to her, leaving her exposed and aching in the aftermath of their hollow connection. Alara's vision blurred with unshed tears. She traced the cold, silk sheets, the emptiness beside her more palpable than his recent presence. Serena's life, the words were a brand, searing her conscience. She had done it for Serena, yes, but also for him. For the love that had bloomed in her heart long before his sister's illness, a love she naively believed could, one day, melt his icy resolve. She'd clung to the marriage clause, the one demanding his conjugal presence, not out of manipulation, but a desperate, self-destructive hope that physical proximity might rekindle a spark, any spark, in the man who now looked at her as if she were a plague. Her own desperation sickened her, yet she couldn't stop. The thought of a life without him, even one filled with his hatred, was a void too terrifying to contemplate. Caleb stood by the window, staring out at the manicured gardens, the perfect tableau of a life he never wanted. Celeste, her name was a silent lament, echoing in the chambers of his heart. He'd been on the verge of proposing, of building a future with the woman he adored, when Alara Vance, with her deceptively gentle eyes, had presented her ultimatum. Marry her, or Serena, frail and dependent, would suffer the consequences of an anonymous, damning medical report she threatened to leak. A lie, he now realized, but at the time, facing his sister's rapidly declining health, he'd seen no other choice. Alara had always been there, quietly helpful, seemingly devoted, but beneath that veneer, he now knew, lay the soul of a manipulative opportunist. This marriage was a cage, and she, the architect of his misery. He turned back to the bed, to the woman curled into herself, her silent sobs shaking her slender frame. The sight brought him no satisfaction, only a fresh wave of bitter resentment. He had promised himself he would make her regret every single moment of this forced alliance. And he would keep that promise. 7 years later, the silence in Lakeview Estate was no longer merely a backdrop to Alara Vance's quiet endurance. It was a vast, echoing chasm she had finally chosen to step away from. The divorce papers, crisp and final, lay on Caleb Thorne's mahogany desk, a stark testament to a love that had never been reciprocated, only scorned. Her heart, once a boundless wellspring for him, had slowly calcified under the ceaseless onslaught of his disdain, each cutting word about Celeste, his true love, a shard embedded deeper within her. She had vanished, not with a dramatic farewell, but with the quiet dignity of a soul too weary to fight any longer, seeking the secluded solace of Azure Cove. Caleb, finding the documents that morning, felt not a pang of loss, but an exhilarating rush of freedom. The blackmailer, the manipulator, the woman who had bound him against his will, she was finally gone. He celebrated that night at the Obsidian Lounge, the thrum of the bass a counterpoint to the lightness in his chest. With a triumphant grin, he pulled the heavy platinum band from his finger, twirling it once before letting it clatter into a crystal glass of whiskey, the metallic clang a joyful peal of release. Leo Maxwell, ever observant, raised an eyebrow but offered no comment, merely toasting Caleb's apparent liberation. Days bled into weeks, and a curious, almost imperceptible shift began to ripple through Caleb's carefully constructed indifference. The sprawling Lakeview estate, once a resented cage, now felt unnervingly silent. Its grand halls, previously filled with Alara's unobtrusive presence, the faint scent of her jasmine tea lingering in the library, the soft rustle of her turning pages in the sitting room, the rare, gentle hum of her voice in the garden were now truly empty. The impeccably maintained gardens, once a source of her quiet joy, began to show the neglect of a missing hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail that clawed at something within him he refused to name. He found himself pausing in odd corners, a strange sense of something missing. A half-finished crossword puzzle on a side table, a forgotten scarf draped over a banister, a worn paperback book tucked beneath a cushion, each a phantom limb of her existence. One evening, reaching for a bottle of champagne for a solitary toast, he hesitated. He remembered Alara's quiet refusal, her almost apologetic explanation of a severe alcohol allergy. He'd scoffed then, convinced it was another of her flimsy excuses to avoid socializing. Now, the memory surfaced unbidden, a tiny, uncomfortable prick in his armor of resentment. It wasn't just the allergy, it was 1,000 small, insignificant details he'd dismissed, things he'd never truly known or cared to learn about the woman he'd shared his life with for 7 years. The void expanded, a gnawing emptiness that defied his expectation of perpetual freedom. He had always believed Alara was incapable of truly leaving, that her clingy, manipulative nature would drive her to cling to him forever. Yet, she had vanished utterly, completely. Her absolute absence was a silent, damning rebuke to his long-held beliefs, forcing him to confront a truth more unsettling than her presence. Alara Vance, the woman he had meticulously sculpted into his personal villain, was proving to be a ghost he couldn't quite exorcise. And the silence she left behind was beginning to scream. Felix Adler and Serafina Reyes materialized in Caleb's polished office, their faces grim. "Caleb," Felix began, his voice tight, "there's news about Alara. She committed suicide." The air left Caleb's lungs in a silent gasp. The room swam. The meticulous edifice of his contempt, built brick by brick over years, crumbled in a single, deafening crash. The truth, stark and undeniable, slammed into him with the force of a wrecking ball. Alara was gone. Not playing games, not hiding, not manipulating. Gone. The weight of every cutting word, every icy glance, every cruel act he had inflicted upon her, crushed him. He saw her face, not as his blackmailer, but as the woman who had loved him, who had endured him. The face in the portrait seemed to mourn him, the man he had been, the man he had forced her to leave behind. He staggered from the boardroom, the world a blur of disorienting pain. The freedom he'd savored, the void he'd ignored, now coalesced into a suffocating shroud of regret. He locked himself away in Lakeview Estate, now an echoing tomb. Days merged into a single, agonizing night. He found himself at her small, unassuming grave in a remote corner of the family cemetery, a place he'd never visited. With bare hands, he clawed at the earth, a desperate, frantic animal, until he unearthed a simple, unadorned urn. It was light, almost empty. Yet, to him, it held her essence. His madness blossomed then, a twisted, macabre flower. He attempted to end his own life, a desperate, futile attempt to join her, to escape the searing guilt. He was saved, but his mind had fractured. He talked to the urn, whispered apologies, confessed a love he'd been too blind, too proud, too hateful to acknowledge in life. He took it on honeymoons to places they had never visited, creating a phantom life with a phantom wife. He held it close, murmuring about a future he'd stolen, about the children they could have had. "She's pregnant, you know," he'd confide to Leo, a haunted smile on his face, cradling the urn as if it contained their unborn child. His grief was a performance for an audience of one, the ghost of the woman he had destroyed, who now returned to him in a tragic, delusional echo of the love he had so cruelly scorned. The architect of contempt had become the prisoner of his own haunting regret. 2 years later, the corporate world held its breath, buzzing with whispers of Sky Group's aggressive market entry. Caleb Thorne, a ghost of his former self, had meticulously rebuilt Thorne Industries from the brink, his grief-scarred mind having wrestled back control, though the phantom weight of an urn still lingered in his darkest hours. He sat at the head of the negotiation table, projecting an icy calm, prepared to discuss a critical merger that would solidify his company's dominance. The door opened, and a collective gasp rippled through the room. Stepping into the sterile, high-stakes arena was Alara Vance, not the fragile woman he had scorned, nor the desperate wife he had driven to the brink, but a phoenix in a tailored charcoal suit, her presence radiating an authority that silenced even the most seasoned executives. Her hair, once a soft cascade, was pulled back in a severe, elegant style, framing eyes that held an unnerving indifference. They met Caleb's across the polished mahogany, and for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, he was speechless. The air crackled with unspoken history, and the familiar ache in his chest was now laced with an icy dread. Alara Vance, executive president of Sky Group. The name itself was a declaration of war. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice a low, perfectly modulated tone that held no trace of the trembling girl he once knew, "I trust you've reviewed Sky Group's counterproposal regarding the acquisition of Solaris Tech." Her words were professional, clinical, but beneath the surface, Caleb felt the sharp edge of a blade. She sat opposite him, not with a plea for recognition, but with the cool disdain of a conqueror surveying a conquered land. The power had irrevocably shifted. She cut him off, her gaze piercing him with an intensity that burned through his pleas. "Love," she scoffed, a chilling laugh escaping her lips. "You call that love, Caleb? You loved a ghost. The woman you claim to have loved, the one who bore your contempt and still clung to you, is dead. She died when you shattered her, when you destroyed her family's legacy, when you put her brother in a coma. I am what's left. And I live for one thing now, Caleb, to see Thorne Industries burn, just as you watched Vance Holdings crumble. There is no us. There is only hatred. And retribution." Her words were a death knell, echoing in the cavern of his heart. The ghost of Alara Vance had returned, but she was a phantom of vengeance, meticulously carving out his empire, brick by agonizing brick. Caleb watched her walk away, a solitary, formidable figure, leaving him standing amidst the ruins of his own making, the bitter taste of regret an unbearable burden. He had once been the architect of contempt, now he was merely the target of its devastating return. Alara Vance, sharp-edged and resolute, delivered another calculated blow to Thorne Industries, orchestrating a public revelation of questionable offshore investments that sent their stock plummeting. Her gaze, cold and unyielding, scanned the morning news, a grim satisfaction warring with the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. This was retribution. This was justice for Reese, for her family, for the years Caleb had ground her spirit into dust. Yet, as the headlines screamed of Thorne's losses, a faint tremor of doubt, a ghost of memory, flickered within her. She immediately crushed it. Caleb Thorne was a monster, his suffering a deserved consequence. Later that afternoon, a discreet message from Leo Maxwell, Caleb's loyal confidant, found its way to her desk. Urgent and sensitive information regarding Reese's accident. For your eyes only. Curiosity, sharper than any business instinct, compelled her to agree to a meeting. Leo, looking uncharacteristically somber, bypassed pleasantries, placing a nondescript USB drive on the polished table. Before you condemn Caleb further, Alara, you need to see this. He wouldn't want you to, but it's the truth. Alara took the drive, her fingers tightening around it. What truth could a man like Caleb possibly offer? Back in the sanctuary of her penthouse, she plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, showing surveillance footage from Lakeview Estate. The initial clips confirmed her narrative: Caleb, cold and dismissive, shredding documents, drinking alone. Then, the timeline jumped months after her supposed death. The image shifted, revealing a man she barely recognized, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his once commanding presence reduced to a shattered shell. He was talking to an urn. Her urn. He caressed it, whispering words of desperate love, of agonizing regret. He took it to dinner, laid it beside him in bed, even brought it to a beach, murmuring about a future he'd stolen from them. His grief was raw, consuming, a descent into madness so profound it twisted Alara's stomach. This wasn't the indifferent monster she'd envisioned. This was a man utterly broken, driven insane by loss. The certainty she'd built her empire on began to crack, the foundations of her revenge trembling. Before she could fully process the disturbing footage, her phone rang. It was Reese's doctor, his voice brimming with cautious optimism. "Miss Vance, Reese, he's awake." The hospital room was stark white, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Alara. Reese, pale and weak, met her gaze, a flicker of his old self in his eyes. He spoke slowly, haltingly, recounting a different story than the one she'd clung to. Vivian Monroe, she told me things about Caleb, about how he was responsible for everything. She manipulated me, told me to confront him, that day, by the cliff. It was an accident, Alara, but she made sure it looked like Caleb's fault, and then she told me, you were gone. Reese's words were a brutal hammer blow, shattering the last fragments of Alara's carefully constructed reality. Vivian, Celeste's envious sister. The true orchestrator. The layers of deception, the calculated lies, the puppet strings that had danced Caleb and herself into a spiral of hatred and despair. Caleb's pain was real, a harrowing testament to a love she hadn't known he harbored. But Reese's vegetative state, her years of agonizing grief, her family's ruin, all Vivian's doing. Yet her heart, once an icy fortress of vengeance, now throbbed with a terrifying duality. The cold fury she felt for Vivian warred violently with the rekindled ember of love for Caleb, a love she'd believed dead, buried under layers of his perceived cruelty. Her revenge, once righteous, now felt tragically misdirected, her carefully honed hatred a bitter, poisoned chalice. The cold mountain air bit at Alara's cheeks as she stood at the secluded pass, the weight of recent revelations pressing down on her. Reese's awakening, Leo's footage, they had dismantled her carefully constructed fortress of vengeance, leaving only a raw, throbbing cavity of doubt and a horrifying realization of Caleb's genuine agony. Her focus, once razor-sharp, was now a fractured mirror reflecting the man she loved, the man she'd condemned. A sudden rustle from the dense foliage shattered the quiet. Before she could react, Vivian Monroe emerged, flanked by two burly figures, her delicate features twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Enjoying the view, Alara? It's the last one you'll ever see." "Vivian!" Alara gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her throat. "What is this?" "Justice!" Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing off the rock face. "Caleb was mine. Celeste's heart deserved him, and I deserved her legacy. You took it all, you pathetic, manipulative leech." Just as the thugs advanced, a blur of motion appeared from the trees. Felix Adler, his face grim, launched himself forward, knocking one of Vivian's men aside. "Run, Alara. I won't let her touch you." He whirled to face Vivian, his voice strained. "I tried to protect you, Alara, to save you from Caleb's obsession. But she's pure poison." Vivian merely laughed, a chilling, high-pitched sound. "Fool. You think you can stop me?" The remaining thug overpowered Felix with brutal efficiency, slamming him against a jagged rock. Felix slumped, groaning, his efforts futile. Vivian leveled a small, gleaming pistol at Alara. "Goodbye, Alara Vance. Tell Celeste I said hello in hell." A gunshot rang out, deafening in the silence. But it wasn't Alara who fell. Caleb Thorne, his face contorted in agony, stumbled forward, clutching his chest. He had appeared from nowhere, diving in front of Alara at the last possible second. Blood bloomed rapidly on his pristine white shirt, a grotesque scarlet flower against the stark fabric. His eyes, wide with a mixture of pain and a desperate, unspoken love, found hers. "Caleb!" Alara screamed, collapsing to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed against the gushing wound. Warm, sticky blood coated her fingers. "No, Caleb, stay with me." He gasped, a shallow, ragged breath, a faint, lopsided smile touching his lips. "Alara, my love." His voice was a raw whisper, each word a monumental effort. "I found you. I always find you." He struggled, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that burned through the pain. "Vivian." She carried Celeste's heart, the heart of the woman I thought I had lost. I kept her close, a twisted penance. For a ghost. But you were never a ghost. You were always real, my life, my breath, the only one. A tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. "I hated you, because I loved you, so fiercely, it terrified me. Forgive me." Alara. The dam broke within Alara. 7 years of suppressed love, hatred, pain, and betrayal shattered into 1,000 pieces. She saw only the man bleeding out for her, the man who had loved her to the point of madness. "Caleb. No, don't leave me. I forgive you. I love you. I always loved you. Don't you dare leave me now." Her own tears streamed down her face, mingling with his blood. She pressed her lips to his, tasting salt and copper, a desperate kiss that defied death. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each terrifying second. Vivian, momentarily stunned by Caleb's sacrifice, regained her composure, but it was too late. Police swarmed the pass, apprehending Vivian and her thugs. Medics rushed to Caleb, their urgent voices a dull hum in Alara's ears as they worked frantically. Days bled into weeks. Caleb, miraculously, clung to life, his recovery a testament to his resilience and Alara's unwavering vigil. Vivian Monroe was sentenced to life imprisonment for attempted murder and a litany of other charges uncovered during the investigation. Marcus Thorne, implicated in Vivian's schemes to destabilize Vance Holdings, received a substantial prison sentence. As Caleb healed, Alara never left his side. The past, with all its bitterness and misunderstandings, had been purged by blood and sacrifice. One quiet afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed into his hospital room, Alara sat by his bed, holding his hand. "I was so lost," she whispered, her eyes brimming with a tenderness he hadn't seen in years. "So consumed by what I thought was your cruelty, by my own pain. I almost destroyed us completely." Caleb squeezed her hand, his strength slowly returning. "And I let my pain twist into hatred, pushing away the only light I had. I put you through hell, Alara. There's no excusing it, even with the truth about Celeste's heart. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Alara leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "We'll face it together. All of it. Our love, it's been through fire. Now, it's something purified, something unbreakable." She looked up, her gaze soft but resolute. A love without reservation, without regard for the consequences. Caleb pulled her closer, his heart finally finding its true home. "Forever, Alara."